Okay, AP Government kids, this is Chapter 1, the Introduction to Government in America. This is Master Instructor Chairman General Thorson, the Benevolent Dictator, coming to you live from Bunker 167. So let's get started. Okay, so the introduction to government in America. Some of this is pretty much common sense. Politics and government matter. Of course they do. We would be in utter chaos without government because men are not angels, according to James Madison. Americans are apathetic about politics and government. They don't really care. Yeah, that's about right. And American youth are not likely to be informed about government and politics and rarely participate in politics. That's you guys. You don't care and you're not participating. Well, you know what? It's time to care. It's time to start participating, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. If you look at this graph, you will see it's showing the percentage of college students saying that it is important to keep up with the political affairs of the country. And from the 60s to about the early 80s, you can see that they stopped caring, and then there was a little stop in the study for a little bit. But you can see that in the 90s, people stopped caring. It did go up a little bit in the early 2000s, but I'm sure you can figure out why it went up starting in 2001. Think about what happened that year. So here's some more stats that back up the proof that young kids don't really care about anything. If you notice that as the years go on in age, the more people get interested in political activities and the more knowledge they have about politics. So, moral of the story is, when you run for office, focus on getting the old people's vote. Another shining example about why you guys and how you guys don't care about anything that has to do with politics. If you look at the voter turnout from 1972 to 2004, these are presidential elections, you could see the percentage of people turning out over the age of 65 is much greater than those under 25. And as you can see also in 1996 and 2000, you really didn't care about what you're voting for. Oh wait, shoot, that's when I was voting when I was young. But I did vote, so I shouldn't be part of that. So what is the definition of government? Government is the institution and processes through which public policies are made for society. So basically it's the places and the means through which we make policy for you and me to follow and to protect us. So it leads us to two basic questions. How should we govern, and what should the government do? So how should we govern? Do we do it with all the power at the national level, power at the state levels? Do we split it up? And what should the government do? Should they tax us? Should they protect us from each other? You know, those are the types of questions we're going to be looking at. Now, government typically maintains a national defense, provides services, collects taxes, and preserves order. That's pretty much no matter what type of government you have, that's what they're going to be doing. All right, now some people get government and politics confused, so here's the definition of politics. Politics is the process by which we select our leaders and what policies they produce. Politics produces authoritative decisions about public issues. So it's politics is how we pick who leads our government, and politics is how they decide what to do. Just in layman's terms, the Laswell's definition, it's who gets what, when, and how. That's politics. All right, this picture shows you the process by which policy becomes policy and how it evolves over time. So it starts with the people. The government looks at what the people's interests, problems, and concerns are. And then the linkage institutions, these are institutions that link the people to the actual government, and that would be like political parties, elections, that links us to the government because we get to pick the government, the media who informs us, and interest groups like the NRA and NAACP. That moves on to policy agenda. It's like, okay, now that we see what their problems are, we're going to start looking at what political issues to change, and then we send that to the policymaking institutions, the three branches in the bureaucracy. They take what policy that we feel needs to be done and they make it into policy, whether it's through expenditures, meaning what they spend their money on, collecting taxes, making laws, making regulations for like businesses to follow, or they just don't make a decision at all, like we've been seeing lately with Congress. And then once that's done, it gets sent back to the people, and we get to reap the benefits or be very sad about very bad laws. All right, like I said, it starts out with the people. They have interests, problems, and concerns that they feel. So think about that. What interests or problems or concerns do you have that you wish somebody would fix for you?
So, like I was talking about before with linkage institutions, those are political channels through which people's concerns can become political issues put on an agenda for the government to look at. So, what links us to the government that can get our policy actually made? Political parties, they help us out. Again, us through elections, we get to choose our elected officials. The news and media lets us know information that we can be concerned about or want to get changed, and interest groups, like I said, the like NRA, NAACP, they're always working with the government trying to get policy changed. All right, so policy agenda are issues that attract serious attention of public officials. They look at this and they say, oh, a lot of people are concerned with this, maybe I should do something about it. When do they arise? When people disagree about a problem and how to fix it. Some issues will be considered and others will not, and the government's policy agenda changes regularly. For a while it was healthcare. That's always a big one on the policy agenda, and that's when Obamacare got created. But we also see major issues right now with things like Social Security and pension systems, especially in our wonderful state of Illinois. What are policymaking institutions? Those are the things that you know about these things. They are the branches of government that take charge on taking action on political issues. What are they? The legislative, which is Congress, we call it Congress, the executive branch, which we call the president, the courts, which are both at the state and federal level, and the bureaucracies. Again, those are both state and federal level. Some examples of bureaucracies would be like the FBI, CIA, State Department. All right, public policy is a choice that government makes in response to a political issue. A choice could also be to not do anything. So there are different types of public policy. Congressional statute, which is a law passed by Congress, like No Child Left Behind, that really works well. Presidential action, which is a decision by a president, like when the U.S. troops invaded Iraq. The Gulf of Tonkin, that was also a presidential action. Court decision, any opinion by the Supreme Court, other courts, Roe versus Wade, Marbury versus Madison, that kind of stuff. Budgetary choices, where the legislative, it's an enactment of either taxes or expenditure, anything with the budget. And regulations, which is an agency adoption of regulation, like the FDA making a new drug. These are really important to know, so make sure you study these. So what do we ask ourselves when it comes to the impact on policy? Number one, does it solve the problem, or does it create more problems? Depending on what type of politician you ask, you'll get a completely different answer. It also, and depending on the answer, policy impacts can carry the political system back to its point of origin, which is the concerns of the people. So let's say it doesn't solve the problem, it's going to go back to the concerns of the people and then start all over again. So we live in a democratic system. So what is a democracy? A democracy is a system of selecting policymakers and of organizing the government so that policy represents and responds to the public's preferences. What the heck does all that mean? Basically, we, the people, choose who we want to govern us, and those people in turn will make the policy for us, those people we elect. What are the components of a traditional democratic theory? Equality in voting, everybody gets a chance to vote. Participation is effective. People are enlightened and they understand what's going on. Citizens are the ones that control the agenda, and all are included. There are many theories to U.S. democracy, and remember these things because not only are they going to be in the U.S. government, they're going to be in SandwichGOPO as well. The pluralist theory is the happy rainbows and sunshine theory of government that emphasizes that politics is mainly competition among groups, and all of these groups are equal and they press for their own policy, but they're all equal and they all have equal opportunities, and that they'll work together to help the public prevail through bargaining and compromise. Again, flowers and another theory is the elite or class theory. This isn't all sunshine and flowers and rainbows like the last one. This theory of government politics basically says that society is divided along class lines, and that the upper class elite are going to rule regardless of the formal niceties of the governmental organization. Basically, they're saying no matter who's in charge, we're not all equal. The rich rule, money rules, and that gives you power. The next theory of U.S. democracy is hyperpluralism. It's a theory of government politics that says that groups are so strong that they weaken the government because the government appeases to them, and that groups control policy and prevent the government from acting. It's very, very difficult to coordinate policy implementation, actually get it put into place because these groups are so big and the government's so big that it makes it weak. It's very confusing. We have very contradictory policies, and it results from politicians trying to placate and appease every group. And as we've seen, appeasement is never a good policy. So what are some of the challenges that we face with democracy? Well, there has been increased technical expertise. You're like, what the heck does that mean? It just basically means that there's more technicalities to democracy, and that just gives you too many definitions, and no one really wants to listen. Everybody tunes you out. Very few people participate in government, so people kind of see it as, what's the point? And if you want to participate, it's hard to unless you got a lot of money. It's super expensive to run a campaign. For instance, in 2012, it's estimated that President Obama's campaign is going to cost him $1 billion. I'm not exaggerating. And there's so much interest in so many different things, it causes policy gridlock where nothing gets done. What is our political culture? Political culture is the overall set of values widely shared within society, no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Federalist, Communist, Anarchist, well, maybe not Anarchist, you share that value. So what is our American political culture? It's comprised of lots of things, like liberty. We all believe that we should be free. Egalitarianism, that's a big fancy word for everyone's equal. Individualism, we are all individuals and we are all free to do as we please, again, going with liberty. Laissez-faire is the idea of hands-off government in our business. And populism, which is doing things for the people, we the people. All right, so what kind of questions do people have about democracy? Well, are people knowledgeable about policy? The answer, no, they don't know anything. Do they apply what they know when they vote? Sometimes, most of the time, they just like somebody because they look pretty. I am not kidding. Do elections facilitate political participation? Presidential ones do, local ones not so much. What about institutions? Is Congress a representative institution? Well, if you look at the demography of it, not so much. It's getting a little bit better. For instance, the men outnumber the women in the Senate 83 to 17, even though women outnumber men in real life. Does the president look after the general welfare of the people? Depends who you're talking about. If you're talking about George Washington, yeah. If you're talking about Nixon, what are the questions about democracy, about linkage institutions? Do interest groups help the process, or do they get in the way? Well, just depends what you're talking to and who you're talking to. Do political parties offer clear, consistent choices for voters, or do they intentionally obscure their positions? That's a very good question that is going to be posed in this next election. Do media help citizens understand their choices? Depends who you're watching.
One question that remains about the American government is, how active are we? Well, you can decide on your own whether or not you think we are too active or not active enough, but here's some facts for you. The government spends about $3.1 trillion annually. It employs over 2.2 million people, and by it, I mean the national government when I'm talking about the spending and the employed. The national government owns 1/3 of the land in the United States. It occupies 2.6 billion square feet of office space, and it owns and operates 400,000 non-military vehicles. So that can give you an idea just in numbers of how much they do. Whenever we do notes in here, I always have questions and talk about the scope of the government. And what that means is basically how much of the country does the government control? Is it big government where it gets involved in everything? Or is it small government where it's hands-off government and lets the businesses and the individuals decide on how things are? So when we look at Constitution and federalism with the scope of the government, what role does the Constitution's authors foresee for the federal government? Do they see them as a big government or a small government? Hands-on, doing lots of stuff, or hands-off and letting people and businesses do their own thing? Does the Constitution favor government with a broad scope? Yes, it does. Absolutely. Why? Because it's very vague. And when the more vague you are, the more things you can cover. Why did functions of federal government increase? Because times change, and we're going to talk more about that later. Has a more active government constrained or protected civil rights and liberties? That is entirely up to you. You decide. With the scope of government, it comes to the public and linkage institutions. Does the public favor a large, active government? Typically, those on the left, those who are liberal, those who are Democrat, do, while those on the right do not, especially the Tea Party. Do competing political parties force government to provide more public services? According to hyperpluralism, it does, and I want you to figure out what I mean by that. Do elections control the scope of government? It just depends. It depends who's running the show. Does pressure from interest groups create a bigger government? Yeah, absolutely, because they want to appease, and that way, when they appease, they get more programs put into place. And how do you control those more? The more programs you add, you have to make a bigger bureaucracy. Has the media helped control the size of government and your policies? Depends who you're talking to. Again, if you talk to Fox News, they would say, yeah, they're trying to make it smaller. But if you talk to MSNBC, they say, oh, it's fine. How do non-elected institutions like the courts and the bureaucracy fit into the scope of government? Well, here's some questions we can ask ourselves. Are the federal courts too active in policy making, intruding on the authority of other branches of government? Well, if they decide something's unconstitutional, I can pretty much guarantee you that the legislative branch and the executive branch would say yes to that. The courts are being too active. What about the bureaucracy? Is the bureaucracy constantly trying to expand its budget, or is it simply reflecting the desires of the elected officials? Again, that one's up for debate. That's actually a really tough question to answer. Is the federal bureaucracy too large and thus wasteful and inefficient in the implementation of a policy? If you ask the right, if you ask the Republicans, if you ask the Tea Party, the Libertarians, they would say yes, absolutely. They are too big. They waste money. Cut some programs. The left would say no, they're fine. Leave them as they are. In fact, expand them. All right, to sum everything up, remember, young people don't care about government and politics. Even though it affects everyone, they just do not care. They have other things to worry about. Democratic government, which is how the United States is governed, consists of those institutions that make policy for the benefit of the people, and we, the people, choose those policymakers, which are the politicians. What government should do to benefit the people is a topic central to the American government. That's their job. What are you going to do for me? Hands out. Gimme, gimme, gimme. That's what it's like. We'll continue later on with Chapter 2. That will be our next chapter that we'll be covering, and it is about the Constitution. This is McG Thorson signing out, a.k.a. K-Thor. And always remember, if you ain't first, you're last.